It started with the biggest pipe bomb the FBI had ever seen.
There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes.
It ended in a dumpster after the largest manhunt in American history.
My knees knocked so hard that I was about to answer them. That's how nervous I was.
Eric Rudolph and the rise of anger.
Domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now.
True story, true crime, true consequences for us all.
American Shrapnel, from award-winning journalists Becca Andrews and John Archibald, two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Talk about stepping up! Bang! Bang! It's time to level up your game. Introducing the all-new ESPN app. All of ESPN, all in one place. Your home for the most live sports and the best championship moments.
The electricity is palpable.
Step up your game with no annual contract required. It's the ultimate fan experience. Level up for more on the ESPN app or at stream.espn.com. Sign up now.
Training camp is over and the regular season is approaching, everybody. It's time to get excited. Welcome to another episode of the No Huddle Show, our Philadelphia Eagles podcast for NJ.com. This is Cayden, Steele, and joining me today will be a special guest, PennLive's Eagles beat reporter, Johnny McGonigle. Bob Brookover is out on vacation this week, and Johnny was kind enough to join us to break down the Eagles' last preseason game tonight against the New York Jets. We went over our expectations for some of these roster battles. With the deadline set for Tuesday, the Eagles have to trim down to 53. Who are some of the guys that really need to have a good performance to stick around this season? We also outlined just some of our general thoughts on the Eagles training camp, winners, losers, and what we think about this team as we do get closer to the regular season. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Penco Tech. With two convenient campuses in Blackwood, New Jersey, and in Bristol, Pennsylvania, Penco Tech has provided comprehensive hands-on career training for more than 50 years, featuring programs in HVAC, electrical, plumbing, automotive technology, and more. With dedicated instructors and career placement assistants, Penco Tech can give you the skills and confidence to build a brighter future. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Learn more and take the first step by going to pencotech.edu. All right, let's bring in our guest now, Johnny McGonigle from PennLive, their new Eagles beat reporter. He's done a fantastic job so far. How you doing today, Johnny, before we get into all this madness that's coming up on Friday night?
Madness is a good way to put it, Cayden. No, I'm doing really well. I appreciate you guys having me on. Looking forward to many more podcasts throughout the season as PennLive and NJ.com as we continue to work together. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And like you said, it's been a great experience so far. And the next few days are about to get hectic for sure. The Eagles play the Jets on Friday night in their preseason finale at MetLife Stadium. It's a night game. And then we'll have the weekend, and that will pass. But right before, and then on Tuesday, we'll get right into roster cuts, though. It's going to be a long weekend in general. The Eagles have a lot of tough decisions. But first, let's go over some of the news from today. Johnny Wilson, the second-year wide receiver from Florida State, has been ruled out for the year with knee and ankle injuries, first reported by Jeff McClain of the Philadelphia Inquirer. But at Tuesday's practice, his leg got rolled up on by an offensive lineman. As he came off the field, he couldn't put any pressure on his leg. He was later carted into the NovaCare, and it just didn't look good. But now it's confirmed. Johnny Wilson's out for the year. He had a really good camp the last couple of weeks, Johnny. Strong game against the Bengals. Really strong performance as well in those two joint practices against Cleveland. It seemed like he was kind of figuring things out with his big body, how to use it to get those contested catches. Obviously, he has a role in the offense as a blocker. What was your first thoughts when you heard this news, and how do you think this affects the wide receiver room now? Yeah, first and foremost for Johnny Wilson, I mean, it's really unfortunate, right? A second-year wide receiver, like you mentioned, Cayden, used primarily as a blocker last year for this Eagles team. But, after a slow start to training camp, he really showed up in that first preseason game against the Cincinnati Bengals. 3 catches, 73 yards. A couple of those were those contested one-on-one jump balls where, he's 6'6", right? And you don't see many, if any, 6'6" corners out there. So he's got an advantage on those guys. And he showed it in that first preseason game. And from there, it kind of felt like that gave him new life and gave him kind of a push to continue on in camp and just continue to impress. And in a wide receiver room where we know, roster spots were kind of limited, you're already locked in with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Jahan Dotson, that the bottom of the depth chart was a real, and still is, a real spot of intrigue. And Johnny Wilson was making his claim on a spot. It felt like he had locked up a spot. And, to have this kind of injury now, so soon before the regular season, right before the last preseason game, it's really unfortunate for him. But I do think it opens things up a bit for the wide receiver room and maybe makes decisions on Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni a little bit easier.
Johnny, you make a good point about Johnny Wilson. He had a really good summer, and these reps are valuable for a young player, and it's never good to see a young guy lose these. Maybe he comes back next summer and he builds off what he did, and he has a really strong third year, but it's tough to see. But it does open the door for Darius Cooper to make the roster. So for you Darius Cooper fans out there, if you're worried about him making the 53, this probably means that you don't have to worry anymore. Now he's really has a chance to be wide receiver 5, maybe even wide receiver 4. I know they just brought in John Mechie, but he's had a strong summer, and you don't hear guys, who are UDFAs get praised the way Darius Cooper has. Dallas Goedert saying yesterday that Darius Cooper is his prediction for a player that's going to have a big year. I mean, if he's thinking that, and you're seeing the way A.J. Brown's kind of taking him underneath his wing, and Aaron Moorhead's getting on him at practice, and the high praise that Kevin Patullo's give Darius Cooper, maybe I'm underrating the impact that maybe Darius Cooper does get some offensive snaps at some point this year. And I think this means that he's going to be on the roster, and he has earned that even before Johnny Wilson's injury. But this probably means that he's solidified his spot. And then Anaya Smith, it could mean good news as well. I don't know if he's a roster lock with this injury, but it increases his chances. But he's got to show that he is a difference maker at punt returner to make the roster. Guys like Anaya Smith are on the bubble. Darius Cooper, I don't know, isn't on the bubble as much anymore. But Anaya Smith, and there's so many different guys this week that are going to be on the bubble, and they're going to have to play well against the Jets to make the roster. I mean, it's not just the Jets, though. It's the complete picture of the summer. But this is a tough week around the NFL. A lot of guys are going to lose their jobs. Different guys, will return to the practice squad and they'll continue their careers. But the Eagles have some tough decisions going forward. Roster cutdowns are on Tuesday, and this is the final evaluation. And I do think Anaya Smith will be one of those players that is under the most pressure on Friday night. Johnny, let's start on offense with some of the guys that we expect to play that need to have the big night to solidify their standing on the roster. I'll let you start with the position, and we'll go down and we'll break down who we think needs to have that big night.
Well, let's start with quarterback, Cayden, because we know that obviously Jalen Hurts is not playing. We know Tanner McKee, if last preseason game was any indication that the backup quarterback won't be playing either, that this will be the Kyle McCord, Dorian Thompson-Robinson show like it was against the Browns last weekend. And neither quarterback played particularly well. Kyle McCord, the 6th-round pick out of Syracuse and previously Ohio State, he had a touchdown throw. That was nice. He stood in the pocket, took a hit, but aside from that, that was pretty much the only highlight from the quarterbacks against the Browns. So it's either him or Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They're not going to keep 4 quarterbacks. So one of those guys will end up getting cut, will end up going through waivers and maybe an opportunity with another team or landing even with the Eagles practice squad. But that's what I'm first and foremost looking is the quarterback competition, because these two guys haven't really separated themselves, or at least through my eyes. I don't know if you view it any differently, Cayden, but I don't think these two guys have really separated themselves so much through training camp and the preseason.
No separation. I agree with that. But I think McCord a little bit because he played better than DTR against the Browns. And I think for DTR's purpose, he had to really outplay Kyle McCord. Like, it couldn't be close. It couldn't be like Kyle McCord edged him out by a little bit or he edged out Kyle McCord by a little bit. Like, he needed to completely outplay Kyle McCord. And there were points this summer where DTR was better than Kyle McCord, but it hasn't been consistent throughout the entire summer. It was for a tiny stretch. Now it's back to the point where, like, McCord, I think, has been a little better than DTR, and it's bad news for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think he probably gets waived. Maybe he's the fourth quarterback back on the practice squad, but maybe I'm being a little harsh as well. I mean, I've been disappointed by Kyle McCord, which is, he's a 6th-round pick, so the expectations probably should have been lower on my end, but he was one of my favorite, just from a draft perspective, like a sleeper quarterback. I thought he played really well at Syracuse last year under Fran Brown. I mean, lit up the ACC, and I thought there was something there as a developmental backup that could eventually be Tanner McKee's successor. It's one preseason, and I don't want to overreact, but it hasn't been a very good one for Kyle McCord, and I wonder if they were higher up on the waiver wire, would they be looking for a different quarterback, a third guy, maybe someone they could claim. But I think because they're lower on the waiver wire and they drafted Kyle McCord probably makes this roster, but it's not 100% safe, and neither quarterbacks played well this summer. Let's move on from the quarterbacks. Let's go down position by position. Running backs, to me, it's not too interesting, but to me, there is an A.J. Dillon decision, Johnny. Do you keep A.J. Dillon on your initial 53, or do you release him and you bring him back when his contract is not guaranteed anymore, and you kind of have that handshake deal? And do any of the UDFAs intrigue you enough to, like, you want to keep them around?
Yeah, I like Montrell Johnson out of Florida in terms of a practice squad guy. I don't know if you give him a roster spot, but he's a guy that you hope will get through waivers and you can bring him back into the NovaCare complex and have him, learn, throughout the year. And but I think at running back, it's pretty straightforward. You have Saquon Barkley, you have Will Shipley, who for me has been one of the standouts of the preseason of training camp, proving that he could be that third down back, that receiving back, and replace Kenny Gainwell, who left for the Steelers. But you're right. It is a question of, do you keep A.J. Dillon or not? And I think the biggest thing that he proved this preseason is that he's healthy, coming back from the injury that he had that cost him really all of last year. The fact that he came back and he's looked good, just from a health standpoint, it's just a matter of, if you're looking at the offense, you have to decide, do we want a big bruiser back who can help us on the goal line? Is that valuable enough to keep on the roster straight away? And I would say yes, but that's not my decision to make, right? That's Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni's decision to make. But I've liked enough what I've seen from A.J. Dillon, and really his health is, I think, the biggest thing that's going in his direction.
Yeah, and I think he's good enough to be on the roster, right? But ultimately, it is a numbers game, and it's happened many times before where they've had that handshake deal where they bring the vet back after week one or after at least his contract is not guaranteed anymore. And maybe A.J. Dillon is that guy. I would say Will Shipley to me and is RB2. What he brings as a pass catcher, he's definitely cleared A.J. Dillon, but A.J. Dillon has had a pretty strong summer. I still think he could play in the NFL, and it'll be interesting to see whether the Eagles want to risk losing him because of that injury history that you just mentioned, Johnny. I'm not sure if people are rushing out to sign A.J. Dillon, so he could be expendable in that sense. I've liked Montrell Johnson too. I've also liked Shonderick Powell in limited action. To me, they have both flashed, and they're both worth putting on the practice squad. But like I said to begin this, not as much intrigue at the running back position, maybe not even at the quarterback position, as there is to the wide receiver position. And I know we touched on it earlier, but I just want to get your thoughts on, for a position from a depth perspective that I came into camp feeling underwhelmed about. I didn't believe in Johnny Wilson. I didn't believe in Naismith. I barely knew anything about Darius Cooper. I mean, if I'm being real, I'm like roster long shot. Elijah Cooks had that, that Linsanity run for, 4 or 5 days. It's been a fun wide receiver group. How do we feel like this is all going to shake out?
Yeah, it's been a real pleasant surprise, this group. And again, it's unfortunate with what happened to Johnny Wilson with the camp he was having. But for, an undrafted rookie from Tarleton State, an FCS guy who, to his credit, he tore up the FCS last year, Darius Cooper, 1,400 plus yards, led the FCS level, second in, all the NCAA in receiving, so he comes in as kind of just a dart throw, a flyer. And the fact that he's proven himself so far through camp. I mean, we were talking to Jalen Hurts the other day, and Jalen was asked about Darius Cooper, and he said, "Look, he's got great hands, and I'm starting to trust those hands." And he had a really nice play over the middle where he just kind of put it up for Darius Cooper to go get in double coverage, and he did. And so it's just those little signs, right? Obviously, the big preseason opener where he had 82 yards and a touchdown. But I think it's those little signs throughout camp that's also really shown how far he has come, what kind of impression he has made. And I think with Wilson out, like, you're looking at A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson, who I think has had a really good camp, by the way, Darius Cooper, and then Anais Smith is like, do you need him as your punt returner? Has he made enough of a difference there to earn a roster spot? So, yeah, it's become one of the more pleasant surprises and intriguing positions of camp.
Thank you for bringing up the Jahan Dotson thing. Can we pump the brakes on the Darius Cooper, John Mechie's going to overtake Jahan Dotson stuff that I've seen? Like, Jahan Dotson looks a lot more comfortable this summer, which is no surprise because it's another year in the system. But we talk about a guy that has speed underneath, like really good at running slants and crossers. He's got good hands. He can beat you deep as well. Like, I think Jahan Dotson, obviously he wasn't worth the first round pick that the Commanders spent on him. But if he was a second or third round pick, and with the way he's playing this summer, I'm like, he wouldn't look, like a draft bust. And he's going to be a pretty solid number 3 wide receiver. He's a good player. And this is a big year for Jahan Dotson. If he's productive, or at least mildly productive, let's say he has 40 catches for, 450 yards, 500 yards, just, throwing numbers out to you, but a couple touchdowns here and there. Like, Jahan Dotson will probably get paid by someone else this offseason. Like, this is a big year for him. He's had a good training camp. And no, Darius Cooper and John Mechie probably aren't going to overtake, or I feel confident saying definitely probably aren't going to overtake Jahan Dotson in this offense. But Darius Cooper's got a lot of potential. He's been fun to watch. Is he their version? I mean, we've seen undrafted free agents, have really good careers in situations in the past. Is he, along those lines of like a next Doug Baldwin, next Victor Cruz? I mean, that's high praise. Can he be an upper echelon type wide receiver that come out of nowhere? The talent that I've seen, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm not going to say that there's no chance. I think he could be a valuable contributor and maybe wide receiver 3 in about a year. So incredible summer for Darius Cooper. And it'll be fun to see him on Friday night. And hopefully the offense looks better. Hopefully those quarterbacks that we talked about earlier and we're honest about that they haven't played well, hopefully they play better against the Jets. Let's move on to the tight ends. To me, there's really one decision here. It's Kylen Granson versus EJ Jenkins. Or there's a second alternative to this, or they just don't keep 3 tight ends, which I'm kind of leaning towards. But Johnny, you see this bottom of the depth chart tight end, Kyle Granson, who's kind of flashed this summer as a pass catcher. EJ Jenkins, a guy that's been in the building a long time and was on the active roster last year. Are we keeping 3 tight ends here? Is Kylen Granson over EJ Jenkins, or is EJ Jenkins done enough to stay in your opinion?
Yeah, I think I would lean Kylen Granson as your third tight end behind Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra. Of course, Harrison Bryant no longer with the team after being traded to Houston in that deal for John Mechie III. So it comes down to Kylen Granson or EJ Jenkins. I've liked what I've seen from Granson more as a receiver in terms of the upside there. But I think you ask a fair question in that, is it just 2 tight ends? Do you use that roster spot elsewhere? You look at a guy like a Ben Van Sumeren, like a special teams ace who has a little bit of flexibility on both sides of the ball, really. But as a fullback, especially if you have a package or 2 for him, do you have space for a third tight end? And if someone were to get hurt, like if Dallas or even Grant Calcaterra were to get hurt, there are some veteran tight ends out there in free agency that you could always bring in, or you could elevate a Granson or or an EJ Jenkins from the practice squad if that's ultimately their fate. So I think it's an interesting question you ask about, is it 2 or 3 tight ends? But if it's between the two, I lean Granson.
Yeah, I would as well. EJ Jenkins had a rough practice this past week, dropped a couple passes. He's got great size, and the Eagles have been intrigued with him for the last few years. But I would go with Cayden Granson. If they keep 3, I'm just not sure if it's valuable enough to keep 3. They didn't keep 3 to begin with last year either. Kyle Granson, I think he brings something to the table. Again, he's one of these guys that lasted, a little bit into free agency. It wasn't like he was signed right away. Could you get him back on the practice squad? I think it's very possible. And good point on Ben Van Sumeren. I think he's making the 53-man roster, and they're going to find a way to keep him on. I get the argument of if they're not going to use the fullback that much, but he's an incredible, or at least he could be an incredible special teams player because of his athleticism. And yeah, it's something that you have to factor. But the tight end room, I want to give a shout out to Grant Calcaterra, though. I think he's had a really underrated summer. Hasn't been talked about that much. And I'm not sure, he's going to be any more productive than he was last year. But from my perspective, from what I've seen in terms of him just creating separation and always being in the right spot for Jalen Hurts, I think he's gotten better as a player. And that development's been fun to watch. And I'm interested to see if he's a better blocker this year as well. But yeah, it's going to be fun what they do at tight end here. I don't know, really. I just don't know if 3 is worth keeping it. But let's move on now to the offensive line, which I have to say has been a little disappointing this summer. It wasn't a significant worry of mine coming into camp. And we don't usually talk about offensive line worries with the Eagles because they got Jeff Stoutland and they draft and they develop and they always have great depth. I'm not so sure, Johnny, if they have that great depth right now.
Yeah, it's a real question because you look at what's behind, and of course that depth has come into, greater focus under the microscope with Landon Dickerson's injury. And if we look at the roster math of all this, Landon Dickerson, they're hoping that he's back for the opener at least early in the season. So you wouldn't put him in an IR spot. So he's going to take up a roster spot. Do they go heavier on the offensive line to try to still find that right fit? Because coming into camp, I'll put my hand up. I was way wrong. And I thought Kenyon Green was going to show us something, and that just never, ever materialized. After the Eagles traded for him this offseason, from the Texans acquiring him in that deal that sent CJ Gardner-Johnson the other way. Yeah, it just never happened for Kenyon Green. And so then you're looking at, Matt Pryor, Brett Toth, Drew Kendall, Darian Kennard, Kendall Lamb, Miles Hinton. You've got Cam Williams along with Miles Hinton as rookies, and Cam Williams seems like an IR guy. But yeah, this group on the whole, from a depth perspective, it just hasn't really done much for me, which I know there are greater problems to have because you look across the league and it's like, teams are worried about their left tackle or their right tackle or their center, like their starting guys. So, these are kind of champagne problems for the Eagles a bit, worrying about depth and who's going to be our second guard or second tackle, whatever. But it is something worth considering because these guys always miss time and not just with injuries like, Landon has picked up, but, little injuries here and there that cost you a game or two. And that depth has to show up at some point during the season.
They're going to miss Fred Johnson for sure. And I don't think people realize how solid of a swing tackle that he was. And if you have to see Kendall Lamb play this year, and Kendall Lamb's been a quality swing tackle, a spot starter in his career. He's a veteran. He had a back thing at the end of last year with the Dolphins that I believe he had to get surgery on. Like I read a quote, or at least when he talked about it when he was in Miami, like he couldn't really, like his back kind of went numb. And like to me in training camp, Kendall Lamb, the expectations I had is just like surefire, stable swing tackle, a lot of starting experience. I think he's been really up and down and more down than up recently. And I'm concerned about that because I do think the Eagles thought, this could be our swing tackle. And I'm not sure how much confidence that you can have in Kendall Lamb. Like all players, eventually they break down, and Kendall Lamb could be on the downside of his career. And that's a concern because I don't think Matt Pryor can play tackle. I think Matt Pryor is an okay guard, a serviceable guard. If Tyler Steen were to go down, I think Matt Pryor could, fill in for a couple of games and the Eagles would be okay. But at tackle, I don't believe it either. And then Miles Hinton's not ready yet. I think he makes the 53, but it's going to be a redshirt year. Cameron Williams, Johnny, you alluded to it, whether it's on the practice squad or, some way they work around it. A guy that maybe they want in the building still, but he is not ready to play in the NFL. And then depth-wise in the interior, maybe Brett Toth makes the roster. I don't think that's even a guarantee. They've put him on the practice squad consistently. It's not like a guy that's going to get picked up by another team as well. I think this is a position that I haven't really thought about them making an addition, but maybe they do. And it's tough because they're last on the waiver wire, and I don't know how many good options they'll have, or maybe a vested vet will get released and they can pick up that guy later. But this position, I don't think the Eagles feel great about it, and I surely don't feel great about it. The one guy that I feel the most amount of promise with are two guys. I think I've been encouraged with Drew Kendall. The fact that he went and played some guard in the preseason game and looked pretty solid, that's encouraging. He's their backup center. I think they hit on that pick. I think they got someone that can be serviceable. And then I think Darren Kennard showed me something. He's got guard tackle flexibility as well. Maybe Darren Kennard becomes your swing tackle. Maybe he becomes your top backup guard. And this is all not an issue. But there's a lot of, ifs with this offensive line, which I'm not used to. And there's a lot of ifs with this defense as well. And that's where we're going to go next. We can, be broad with defense. We don't have to start with a certain position. But obviously this cornerback battle is still unsolved. Safety battle is still unsolved. There's concerns at edge rusher. Who are some of these guys that, Johnny, that really you're looking forward to most watching on Friday night?
Yeah, I think you have to start with the corners. Like, will Keely Ringo, just make everyone forget about a disappointing training camp with a really good final preseason game? Like, that's a lot to ask, but you talk about him, you talk about Jacorian Bennett after being, traded to the Eagles from the Las Vegas Raiders earlier in camp. He'll have an opportunity to put his stamp on that CB2 job, in nickel when you've got Cooper DeJean not working on the outside, which we've seen a little bit more of in base even recently. So that's an intriguing spot where obviously we're not going to see Cooper or Reed Blankenship or, certainly not Quinyon Mitchell on Friday night. But, this is an opportunity again for Jacorian Bennett, for Keely Ringo, for Adoree Jackson to go out there and make a play or two and turn a head or two. And maybe in Adoree's case, he kind of went from popular pick from all of us to kind of miss the roster because he hadn't really proven anything to, being probably the week one starter. So maybe he solidifies that. It's just a lot of question marks, man. It's a lot of question marks at corner specifically. So maybe that'll get cleared up a little bit on Friday night, but I'm not necessarily banking on it.
No, me either. And I don't know what to do with Adoree Jackson. My first 53-man projection, like I guess back before or right after the preseason game, or it might have been right before. I forget the timing, but I had Adoree Jackson off the roster. Now, he continually gets the most first-team reps. So, I feel like I can't leave him off the roster because I think he might start week one. But at the same time, the Eagles still might cut him. And then I'm going to, either way, I don't know where to go for Adoree Jackson. And he's the toughest decision when I'm going to have to write my 53-man roster projection. He hasn't been good this summer, but he's been the least bad, and that's what maybe the Eagles value is, that he can be okay enough. I don't think he's going to be good. He's going to give up some plays, but he can be more serviceable than Keely Ringo. And I'm not even sure if Keely Ringo is going to play on Friday. He got hurt earlier in practice this week. I missed Wednesday's practice with a quad injury, and he's had a rough summer, and he needs to play in this game. But even if he plays in this game, I don't know if this saves his job. I'm not sure if he's in the competition anymore. It's been hard to ignore the last few practices. Adoree Jackson, yes, he's running with the ones, but then Jacorian Bennett's mixing in. And then we want to go with the second-team defense. On Tuesday, it was Jacorian Bennett and Mac McWilliams. The third-team defense was Eli Ricks and Keely Ringo. Keely Ringo looks like he's been demoted. And it's been a rough summer from beginning to end, like early in training camp, I had my reservations. I'm like, he's still struggling with some of the same things he struggled with in his first few years, like turning his head and locating the ball and like just not making plays on the ball and just being grabby and not like trusting his technique. And he said all the right things this offseason about that, but it just didn't translate to the field. Then the Bengals game, he misses the tackle on Jamar Chase, and everyone's talked about it. It's not a big deal that he gave up the catch, but whiffed on the tackle, gave up a touchdown. And then in joint practices against Cleveland, he was inconsistent. He's been inconsistent throughout the entire summer, but it hasn't gotten to the point where like you think he's out of the competition. But then the last 2 days at practice, before he got hurt on Wednesday or before he didn't play on Wednesday, he wasn't running with the first team defense anymore. To me, I'm putting a fork in Kelee Ringo being the starter. Am I too early on that? Like the signs are telling me that Vic Fangio is frustrated with Kelee Ringo.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong at all. I think if any, Vic Fangio has been very clear too about Adoree Jackson. I mean, he said earlier in camp, like, I'm not the guy who signed off on bringing him here, basically. So I don't think Vic Fangio was clamoring for them to go out and get Adoree Jackson. I think the Eagles overall entering this training camp really, really wanted Kelee Ringo to emerge and to put his stamp on the job and to say, this is mine. I'm a starter on this defense. And he just absolutely has not done that. And so they're almost like forced into a corner a bit, like, no pun intended. Do we have to start Adoree Jackson or is it going to be Jacorian Bennett? You mentioned Mac McWilliams, who projects more of as a nickel, but I've really liked what he's shown so far. So yeah, it's just a really unfortunate deal because, they spent a 4th round pick on Kelee Ringo a few years ago, and they would have really liked for him to come out and have a positive summer. And it just hasn't come off that way.
They got rid of Darius Slay. They released him. They didn't re-sign Isaiah Rodgers. Didn't think he was worth the money that Minnesota paid him. They took the bet that Kelee Ringo would be ready. They didn't draft a corner until the 5th round. They could have took a corner earlier, but they didn't because they had confidence in Kelee Ringo. And they got the bet wrong. At least it looks that way right now. Maybe there's some turnaround here and Kelee Ringo proves us all wrong. And for the Eagles, that would be a great thing because physically he has everything that you want in terms of like size and speed. And like you would think that he could put it all together. He's still young. So maybe it comes with time. But it's his 3rd year now and he hasn't put it together. And the Eagles misevaluated it. And it could come back to bite them. And it doesn't feel great, right? When your defensive coordinator saying, yeah, I don't really like this veteran too much. I mean, I really didn't evaluate him. This is how he's got. But so you don't feel great about that. And then Mac McWilliams, it seems like a guy that Vic's been high on, but he talked about him the other day. Like, basically said, like, he's got to still show a lot more. And he hasn't shown it yet. He hasn't shown who he could truly be. So pretty much telling you that he has been really fully satisfied with Mac McWilliams' performance either. So the quarterback situation looks tough or rough. And it's the one spot I'm most concerned about. And ultimately, if I had to make a prediction right now, I lean towards Adoree Jackson starts week 1. Jacorian Bennett eventually takes over as the starter, like maybe week 2 or week 3. Like this could be a cornerback by committee, and that's just not a good thing. And I'm definitely concerned about it.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest concern is on this defense because I think elsewhere, I mean, you could be concerned about edge rusher as well. Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, the projected starters. Josh Uche, I think, has had a pretty good camp and at least early on looked like he was locking up that 3rd edge rusher battle. Azeez Ojulari, after a slow start, has come on strong. And then of course, like one of the stars of camp has been Moro Ojomo, behind Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Ty Robinson, the 4th round pick. I mean, they felt confident enough in the defensive tackles to trade Thomas Booker to the Raiders in exchange for Jacorian Bennett. And you look at the linebackers, like just going down the list. I mean, obviously Bond is back. Jahad Campbell, your 1st round pick, has been healthy enough to play after that labrum surgery that we didn't know when we were going to see him this summer. And the fact that he came out so soon and was so aggressive and so athletic. Jeremiah Trotter has played well. Smile Mondon from Georgia as a rookie has played really well. So I just think across the board, And I know we'll have a bigger conversation on safety, but I feel like those other positions that I mentioned, like they're in a good spot. Like when you've had Jalen Carter up the middle of your defense, when you have Bond, when you have Nolan Smith, I think who is primed for a really big year. You have XYZ working in your favor like that. Like the defense is still going to be good. You still have Vic Fangio coordinating this group, but all it takes is one bad spot, one weak link for a really good team, and we're talking about not necessarily even the regular season, but the playoffs. All it takes is one weak link to kind of sink your ship. And right now it's looking like the second corner spot.
Yeah, and it's the most glaring one, but I will say, and you brought it up, I might be more concerned about edge rusher than you are. Look, to me, I can't erase the fact that Azeez Ojulari did nothing for the first 3 weeks. I get he's played better recently.
Yeah, that's fair.
But the whole body of work has been a little underwhelming. And perhaps, it's him getting used to Vic Fangio's scheme, and now he's going to revert back to the promising player that he was with the Giants. I mean, I had a lot of expectations for him, and I don't think he played well for most of the summer. So I don't feel really confident in him. Like Josh Uche, I think has been fine. But edge rusher, to me, is still a concern because you're banking on Azeez Ojulari staying healthy, which he hasn't done in his career, and you're banking on the fact that he's going to start getting, he's going to carry over what he did maybe the last week of training camp and be really productive. But the first 3 weeks, he just didn't look good. So I'm concerned about that. And ultimately, I think that's a position they could add. They lost Josh Sweat. They lost Brandon Graham. And I don't think they're going to be as good at edge rusher this year, but I'm not as worried about edge rusher as I am with corner. And then you mentioned safety. I'm not particularly worried about safety. Like I think it's a minor concern. I do think eventually Drew Makuba, if he can get healthy, because the injuries have piled up in training camp, but if he can get healthy, I think he wins the starting job, and I have a lot of confidence in him. Sidney Brown, I have mixed feelings about. Like I think he's shown some promise, but I still think he's pretty inconsistent. But like I don't think even if Sidney Brown started, he's not as much of a liability as I think the CB2 will be.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Drew Makuba, who, by the way, he was one of my favorite players to watch in college football last year on Texas, like a huge part of the Longhorns run to the CFP semifinal. Like his ball instincts, his spatial awareness, his ability to make plays, and like it was just on display all of last year. And we saw that firsthand, right, in the second preseason game. Him getting that pick six, 75 yards to the house, and then he falls on a fumble, which I guess anyone could have fallen on that fumble. He just happened to be there. The ball seems to find him, which is kind of an innate quality to have, especially as a safety. So I've liked what I've seen when we've been able to see him, because like you mentioned, he dealt with a bit of a nagging injury early in camp. He's now sidelined a little bit. So, can he get healthy for week one? Can he get healthy for, a little later into the start of the season? If you have to start Sidney Brown there early, I think you're okay. But I think ultimately, like the way Sidney Brown plays, like his style isn't necessarily a great fit for Vic Fangio's system. So I think you would love to see Drew Makuba. I mean, that's why they spent a second round pick on him, right? Like you would love to see him get healthy and be that starting safety next to Reed Blankenship in those nickel sets when Cooper DeJean is kind of floating around in the middle of the field making plays.
And you bring up DeJean playing in base at corner this week, and then back when they go into their nickel look, he goes back into the slot. Maybe that's what they do for their base defenses. They have Cooper on the outside. Ultimately, there is some concerns with this defense. We've written about them all summer. I mean, cornerback 2 is an issue. The edge rush depth could be an issue. Safety could be an issue to a lesser degree. But all in all, I still think this defense is going to be pretty good because, Johnny, you mentioned it. I mean, your interior defensive line is deep. I mean, you have Jalen Carter, a potential defensive player of the year. Mora Joma, who might have even more ceiling than Milton Williams, potentially. We have to see it come to fruition, but as a pass rusher, the upside is tremendous. Jordan Davis is in better shape. The linebackers are really good, like you mentioned. Like the spine of this defense was Zach Bond and Jahad Campbell, and you get Nakobe Dean back eventually. And Jeremiah Trot, I mean, they have so much linebacker depth. I think Reed Blankenship's had a good summer. And overall, the cornerback room is still pretty good. With Cooper DeJean and Quentin Mitchell, we're just so focused on that cornerback 2 spot. And you said it earlier perfectly. We're breaking down this team. We're talking about weaknesses as we approach the regular season and we end here with the preseason. These are worries, but compared to other teams, these are not big issues. Like, these are small things. And the Eagles, Vic Fangio has figured things out before, and maybe they can get Jacorian Bennett playing at a high level. Drew Makuba comes in, eventually starts at safety and plays at a high level, and maybe they get something, out of one of these reclamation project edge rushers, and maybe one of them really is a stable presence. And we're not talking about many concerns on this team anymore if that happens. So it's a lot of what ifs, but I think this defense is still going to be really good. They're going to have some tough decisions to make on this defense as well. Maybe Eli Ricks is a guy that will get released. They have some tough decisions in the interior defensive line. Do they keep a 6th defensive tackle like Byron Young? Who's the 5th edge rusher? Is it Patrick Johnson? Maybe. It's not going to be – maybe it'll be Antoine Power Island, but the draft pick from Virginia Tech has disappointed. But there's going to be some tough decisions on this defensive side as well. We covered the offense already. But, Johnny, before we wrap up today, I want to pose you a question. Johnny, if you have to give me one guy that is a surprise make the 53 and a surprise don't make the 53, who would be your 2 guys for that category?
I'll start with a surprise miss, and it's through no fault of his own. But we talked a lot about that linebacker depth. You have Bond, you have Jahad Campbell, you spent a first-round pick on. You spent a draft pick on Smile Mondon, who's played well, and you have Nakobe Dean coming back. Could Jeremiah Trotter Jr. miss the team? And I think that would be a real surprise. But you asked me for a surprise, so I'm just looking at in terms of how many linebackers do they really need, and where are they kind of at what position do they have the depth to lose a player like that? So it would be through no fault of his own because I think he's had a really good camp, but I think Jeremiah Trotter could be a surprise miss. In terms of surprise make, I don't know. I don't know where that comes in. I think Antoine Powell-Ryland would be a real surprise considering we really haven't seen him do much of anything. And I don't mean to pile on a rookie here, but I don't think he's really shown a whole lot. It's tough to find that surprise unless they were to keep, maybe they keep 4 running backs. I think that would be a big surprise. But yeah, what about you? Do you have one off the top of your head in terms of a surprise make?
Yeah, surprise make. It's a little tougher. I do want to touch on the Jeremiah Trotter thing. I don't think that he would be a can. I'll say this. I don't think they'd release him. He's had a great summer, and Bobby King raved about him yesterday. But we've talked about other areas of weakness on this roster. Could linebacker be a position that they take from to trade? If they wanted a reserve offensive lineman, a swing tackle, or if they wanted some other position, could Jeremiah try to be a trade piece if some other team thought he could be a starter? I think that's a possibility. I don't think they would flat out release him, but he's had a really good summer. But we've seen a lot of player for player trades, even yesterday with other teams. So it's a possibility that they could flip a player like that. I don't know if it will be Trotter, but it is bold, so I don't mind it. I don't mind it, but he's had a good summer and it'll be interesting to see. In terms of surprise guys who can make it, it is a little tougher to go down that, but I'll play a little devil's advocate to a degree. I think, and it's not even just a think thing. They obviously value the linebacker position way more than they used to. They drafted Smile Mondon, who's had a really good camp. They had Jahad Campbell now, then Bond, then Trotter. They're not gonna put Nakobe Dean on the 53. He's gonna go to PUP. If they really are invested in the linebacker position now, if this is the identity of Vic's defense, do they keep Lance Dixon, the UDFA out of Toledo, just until Nakobe comes back? Do they carry 5 linebackers on the roster? That would be a little bit of a surprise, but I could see Lance Dixon, who I think has flashed a little bit. He's gone a little underrated. I'm not going to go out and say he's had a Darius Cooper level camp, but you could see the athleticism pop when he plays. Does Andre Sam becoming your fourth safety instead of Tristan McCullum. I think Andre Sam's had a pretty strong summer as well. So I would say those are the two on defense. Like I think Andre Sam and Lance Dixon as like maybe guys that no one are talking about that could sneak on. But offensively, I don't really see any guys. Maybe I haven't put in like Trevor Keegan in any of my 53s. Maybe they end up just holding on to him for one more season because they spent a 5th-round pick on him last year. But this is – Johnny, I think this does speak to another thing coming up with this. Like, there's not a lot – to me, there's not a lot of difficult cuts.
Yeah, no, I mean, you look at it, I think when we're looking at the roster, like I was trying to come up with something kind of crazy, right, with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. because he has had a really good camp, and obviously they value him a lot. And I think the point you made about him being a potential trade piece, I think that makes a lot more sense than obviously flat out cutting him. But you look at I don't know, in Eli Ricks, right? Like he's on the bubble, obviously. Obviously at defensive end, or do you keep a Patrick Johnson, right? Ogbo Okoronkwo, maybe they just deem that Azeez Ojulari didn't do enough, even though he has come on stronger recently. There could be some surprises in there, but for the most part, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like we know. And unfortunately for Johnny Wilson's injury, that has made the wide receiver position a bit more clearer, I think, because that would be kind of the big thought after you traded for John Mechie. Okay, well, who's the odd man out? Well, now that Johnny Wilson's going to be missing the season, it makes that decision a little bit easier. But I think it's relatively straightforward. But hey, there always seems to be a surprise, right, Cayden? So maybe we will be shocked on Tuesday.
I like your Ojulari shout out. Like I think. I was having a conversation off to the side with a couple other reporters. They were talking about like who's your surprise guy, and I said Ojulari. Like I can't forget the fact that I said it earlier, but he did nothing for 3 weeks. And do they go out and make a trade for an edge rusher, like a third edge rusher type to be their top rotational guy? Does that knock down Josh Uche one spot? And then do they go, all right, Patrick Johnson has special teams value. We like Okoronkwo a little bit. Like, and does that leave Ojulari as a potential trade piece or a guy that they release in a little bit of a surprising fashion? I think that's possible. Ojulari would actually be my pick. I'm not like feeling confident about it, but I don't think he's a roster lock. I think some people think he might be after how he played, but I think overall it's just an underwhelming summer. He would be my surprise pick. But for Ojulari and everybody else, we won't find out what's going to happen until next Tuesday when the Eagles make their roster cutdowns. And that's when we'll be back with another podcast as well, breaking down every single move. Thanks for everyone who tuned in today. And we really appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you go on NJ.com and read our written content for Eagles coverage. And also go to PennLive to read Johnny's coverage. It was a fun episode, and I'm glad Johnny was able to get on. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Want to live better? We got a lot of work to do. Join Chris Hemsworth in National Geographic's new Disney Plus original series, Limitless. Live better now.
I'm diving headfirst into cutting-edge science to uncover 3 powerful secrets to living better right now. The growth that occurs through any challenging experience is really what we seek.
Chris Hemsworth stars in Limitless. Live better now. Now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
It's showtime.